where we are going to present and discuss some insights and results of our research project that has been running almost 4 years now. My name is Michael Lettenmeier. I'm situated in Helsinki, Finland, and working for DMat, which is one of our 9 project partners in 7 countries. And so I'm happy that we are having here from our project team today, Halliki Kreinin from RIFS and Lena Domröse from adelphi. And then we have 4 amazing panelists from different parts of Europe. And the idea is that we will have first a presentation of the project, and then we will have a panel discussion, and after this we will have a general Q&A. But first of all, we would like to send you a couple of questions to reply to. And I think, yeah, here we go.
Almost everyone has answered. Should I share the answer?
Yes, please.
So I can share my screen. I think that might help. So now you should be able to see. And I can already go on to the second question, maybe. Oops. And I think here's the second question. And I think it's mostly NGO and advocacy. Michael, can you see the poll answers? Or?
I can see the answers.
Okay.
So happy to hear them from you.
So I'll just finish this and I can show you again the... okay. I'll just put, I think you can see my screen, right?
I can see it now.
Perfect. Okay, and should we do one more question?
Yes.
Do we have time? And I will just start that one as well. Oops. Sorry, I'll start that one again. Here we go. So this is a question about how familiar our participants are with 1.5 degree lifestyles. And can maybe finish this one as well. And can you see the answers?
Yes, we saw them for a minute.
Ah.
So quite familiar, looked like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good to know. Perfect. So,
Do you put the fourth question still, or?
sure. Yeah, let's do the fourth one as well. And I think I have to, finish sharing this one. So I hope you can all see the fourth question now. It's about motivation to attend. One person has clicked inspiration in politically difficult times. Oh, it's going up. Okay, so I think almost everyone has answered, so I will make this available as well. I hope you can see it now.
Yes.
So lots of interest in our project, yay, which is great. Perfect. Okay. Should I?
Much, Halliki.
Perfect, thanks.
I think we then could start with the presentation of the project.
Okay, so here I will hand over to Lena first of all.
Yeah, good evening. Welcome everyone. Also from my side, great to have this crowd here and to speak about this amazing project that has lasted 4 years now. We're coming to an end after in about 2 months. Some highlights are still ahead. We've seen the world changing really in the course of the project. We had a COVID period, right? Then we had wars, we had the energy crisis, we had Trumpism. We really had climate protection enthusiasm in the beginning of the project on the political side, and now we have rather a climate protection fatigue, it seems, at least also when you look at the German election and what people engaged with, the political parties. So the more important to do not forget about climate goals and 1.5 lifestyles. The central objective of our project was to contribute to the mainstreaming of 1.5 lifestyles, and sort of a sub goal of it was to identify the most effective lifestyle options and evaluate their conditions for acceptance and how acceptable they are to households. We then also looked at necessary structural changes to improve acceptance of impactful lifestyle options. And we developed guidelines for political decision makers, but also other stakeholders, such as citizens, and have some great publications on this, such as our citizen guide that's also available on the project website. So please go and look. It's available in many different languages. Why so many languages? Because we also, are a very large group of European partner countries. We have 9 partners in the consortium in total. You see the colorful map of Europe here. And among the 9 countries, we also have 5 case study countries, being Spain, Germany, Sweden, Latvia, and Hungary. We can go to the next slide, where I just make a short, brief sort of point again on why we need 1.5 lifestyles. I mean, we all know that science at the moment is rather agreeing that we will not achieve this goal, but miss it. But we also know and see it here again on the slide that even if we just miss the goal by 0.5 degree, meaning to going from 1.5 degree warming to 2 degree, that, for instance, concerning the global population that is exposed to severe heat at least once every 5 years, more than doubles. And the rest of the impacts on human health, safety, food security, and so forth, you can see it on the slides, and you definitely also know about this from your daily work and interest. And there's another reason why we want to deal with this topic. It's concerning social equity, because we see, next to the health, safety, and food security impacts of a warmer world, also where this this warming comes from. And we see on the right-hand side here a graph with a very unequal distribution of CO2 emissions in the past, and also still projected in the future. So you see this high orange bar here depicting the top earners, the 1% top earners of the world. And I mean, many countries or people in European countries definitely belong to this group of people, or if they don't belong into the top 1% earners of the world, then definitely into the violet column. And you see that the first and the second column, the footprint per capita here reaches 80 or at least over 20 tons per year, which is, as you know, much more than we can and should afford. So we really have we have a massive and unequal distribution imbalance of CO2 footprints. And one remedy of this, and here's where we come to the next slide, is a change in lifestyle. So I want to quote the IPCC report here, that what they said in 2022 is that the right policies, infrastructure, and technology in place would enable a change of lifestyle and behavior that can result in 40 to 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So there's a huge potential here, and this potential we wanted to investigate in our project. So, and when we maybe also to pay justice to the term lifestyle, it is not just about individual action. Lifestyles are always embedded in different structures, and you see them here. They are economic, political, technological, and social. And often we need structural change in order to have a lifestyle change, or to enable a lifestyle change for these individuals or households that you can see here in the center of this slide. And when we change the structural circumstances, then we enable or catalyze certain lifestyle changes in different domains. And the domains that we looked at in this project mainly, you can see the the icons here to symbolize them. It's mobility, it's leisure, it's nutrition, and it's housing. And looking at this, and we can go to the next slide, we used a different set of approaches in our project, from input-output analysis to to quantify the impact of several lifestyle options, to systematic literature and research, to systematic literature research and expert interviews. We try to let's say isolate the 50 most impactful lifestyle options that are available. We confirmed them with expert interviews. We had focus groups to look at structures, and Delphis also to look at how frameworks must and can change, and what are the consequences for all of this, for the welfare state, etc. But I want to focus here a little bit on our very one of the hard pieces of the project, and also where adelphi, that I represent, was involved a lot. They are called the Citizen or Stakeholder Thinking Labs, and this is a very innovative, I would say, format in which it's sort of a workshop in which small groups of people, and for the Citizen Thinking Labs, obviously these were citizens, came together to work on specific questions or problems and co-create solutions. which we could then use in the latter process of our projects. And what we, first of all, in order for the citizens to have a sort of a broad view of and perspective of different groups of people, we try to recruit, coming close to a representative sample in our different case studies. We looked at different ages, rural versus urban population. We invited people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, ages, and so forth. We involved them in a climate puzzle game. That's a board game that's also available after the project, where, and you have a picture here on the right-hand side, where people could they could see from the starting point, where am I with my carbon footprint, and what kind of actions can I take to decrease my carbon footprint if I want to reach a certain goal. And the goal we set was 2.5 tons for the year 2030. And we, of course, for 2050, the goal was even more ambitious. And so people could then see if I change my lifestyle to in a certain way, what impact does it have, and how far or how much closer do I come to the goal? There was also a sort of a second exercise where people then could, let's say, create a roadmap to when they would change certain things until 2030, to give them a bit of time to maybe implement things that are easy first and that are harder later, or where also some maybe structures need to change before they can actually implement them. So that set in motion a big thinking process, and we also found that engaging with people and learning what hinders them to implement certain things and what motivates them was a very useful learning then to derive at policy recommendations later on. But I also want to share and I think I still have a little minute, some results that when we try to measure acceptance of options, what we learned is that for example, we had a very low acceptance rate for options such as I will choose shared housing or I will go vegan. And we had a very high acceptance rates for the options I will buy fewer clothes and shoes or avoid food waste, or also for installing efficient lighting or insulate my house. So this was quite high in terms of acceptance. So more generally speaking, the preference for options that did not require significant lifestyle changes was rather high. People were also quite willing to say they would implement options that required financial investments, at least to a certain degree. And people were more willing to implement options, or they said the acceptance rates for options from housing and leisure domain was higher than the acceptance rates for the domains of mobility and nutrition. And then when we found which options were let's say, very unpopular, we also asked people, so what would you need in order for this option to become acceptable? So what are the conditions of acceptance for something that you would now, let's say, not select as something you want to do? And also maybe staying with the examples I gave you, for instance, for the going vegetarian or vegan, people said that what would help them to do this, to implement this option, was cheaper prices for meat substitutes. It was better promotion of the variety of vegetarian and vegan alternatives and dishes. That came out quite a lot in our thinking labs. And for instance, for the shared living space, people said, well, if public spaces were more accessible and inclusive, and one could, for example, use open air kitchens to cook there and socialize with friends, then one would also accept having a smaller living space. So we saw that the high rejection of some options were actually quite malleable at the end when you ask people what what would change, and people were quite concrete with what they would need in order to change their lifestyle. And with that, I would hand over to Halliki.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I will take over here. There is already one question in the Q&A, and I just wanted to encourage everyone to already ask questions if there's anything that's unclear, or if you have any other questions. The Q&A is open. So I will continue presenting some of our key sort of results and recommendations. Our model calculations done by the team in Leiden using XIO-based multi-regional input-output modeling indicate that staying within the 1.5 degree limit is unlikely, unfortunately. So this is even under highly optimistic assumptions about background changes. So like the rapid adoption of green technologies, improvements in technological efficiency, a shift from fossil fuels to renewables, and so on, policy-driven electrification, infrastructure transformation. So our already pessimistic outlook is based on very optimistic, or maybe even overly optimistic assumptions. And so starting in the baseline year of 2015, many of these assumed improvements have unfortunately not materialized. So due to delays or the unproven nature of key technologies, such as carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, and so on. So this suggests that we are likely to fall even further actually from these necessary emissions reductions. So to address this, we suggest that lifestyle changes must be integrated into policy strategies where we need to target both provisioning and aspirational systems. So ensure that people can meet their basic needs more sustainably. Again, reducing inequality is essential to shifting lifestyles towards sustainability, not only because of carbon inequality, which was already mentioned in consumption emissions, but also because we need that to get democratic approval for changes. So achieving this equitable demand reduction, of course, requires huge coordinated policy efforts. And unfortunately, we are witnessing exactly the opposite. So again, the further we delay, the more difficult, of course, these policy changes are. And here I will move to the next slide. So none of the 5 case countries are able to meet the 2030 and much less the 2050 target. So our analysis highlights that if even under these highly optimistic technological scenarios that rely on potentially unrealistic technological advancements, while assuming economic growth, if even here we fail to meet the targets, so it indicates that actually we maybe need a different economic system. So our results also point towards this result, that the 1.5 degree limit or even the 2 degree limit is fundamentally incompatible with an expanding economy. Lena already presented some interesting outcomes from our citizens thinking labs, which I will not go into in huge detail. But especially the backcasting labs show that citizens are ready for changes if everyone plays along, if these changes are fair. And citizens are also great at coming up with policy solutions themselves to many of the issues that we have. So if we know that we need to reduce car use, especially the use of fossil fuel cars, improved access to public transport is, of course, the answer that we need. Similarly, we need incentives for switching to vegan and vegetarian diets, public support for new housing infrastructure, and investments in cross-border infrastructure if we want to reduce aviation. So when you provide citizens with a vision of an equitable 1.5 degree aligned future, they actually do see many benefits of changes and are willing to make changes. So as Lena mentioned, cost, health, ease or comfort, and being seen as normal and accepted are key to why people are willing to change. So we can't expect people in the existing structures where living sustainably is so difficult, we can't expect people to go against cost, health, ease or comfort, and being seen as abnormal to take these actions against the sort of tide. So the big question is, how do we get from where we are now to this future that we want, where sustainable lifestyles are cheap, healthy, easy, and normal? And how do we skip over the bit in the middle? That's sort of the question that we have. Achieving low carbon lifestyles, of course, also requires addressing rebound effects. So where efficiency gains or lower costs lead to increased consumption. To counter this, we need to focus on systemic changes that support low carbon living. And we of course, keep coming back to this. The key strategies that we suggest in our project is promoting community-based solutions that encourage shared resources, local initiatives, and collective sustainability efforts, as well as facilitating sustainable choices through market regulations so that environmentally friendly options are accessible and affordable. So we come back to this cost and ease aspect. We also need to encourage sustainable financial practices, again, cost. For example, divesting from fossil fuels and making it not so damn financially, yeah, with high payoffs to take part in unsustainable financial practices. We also suggest regulating advertising, which currently promotes high carbon consumption, to shift focus towards sustainable and mindful living. So this goes more in this direction, again, of what is normal in society and acceptable. So currently, of course, advertisement suggests that unsustainable ways of life are normal and acceptable. Achieving a sustainable future requires stringent measures to curb destructive lifestyles and ensure fair resource distribution. So the most influential barriers to sustainability stem from entrenched structures that currently strongly promote overconsumption and environmental harm. And as we keep mentioning, addressing all of these issues will demand structural changes, policy intervention, and a larger shift in societal values. So we have sort of 5 key principles of action that we highlight, stemming from our research on these different sort of structural enablers and barriers. The first one is sufficiency as a guiding principle. So we need to limit resource consumption to what is necessary. We also know this. Reducing environmental impact and ensuring long-term societal well-being. So the question is, how can we move towards new economic system, questioning economic growth as a societal goal and so on. We need to strengthen alternative visions of a good life, these visions that, enable us to accept different ways of life, that help citizens accept low-carbon lifestyles. Another key principle is to strengthen democracy against vested interests. So we need somehow, again, the question is, how do we do this? We need to counterbalance the power of vested interest. How do we get this stronger democratic participation? How do we get more power for citizens' councils and community-driven solutions? We urgently need policies that reduce economic and political inequality, because of course, this has a huge impact on our democracy. We need to tax the wealthy. How can we achieve these goals? Promote transparency and accountability in policy making, also to prevent even more corporate influence over our democratic processes and over sustainability efforts. As a third key principle of action, we need to empower citizens as well as consumers. So citizens as consumers and citizens as citizens. And we need much more access to knowledge and skills that help inform to make better sustainable choices, but in general also help democracy and help our democratic processes. We need economic and regulatory measures. Again, we come back to this cost issue. So we need economic incentives for sustainable lifestyles, subsidies for renewable energy, subsidies for sustainable and local goods, and so on. We need to internalize environmental costs and incorporate them into pricing structures. Again, subsidies for low-income households to make it fair and equitable. And again, the question is, how do we implement these regulations, much more stringent regulation to curb overconsumption, luxury consumption, private jets, and so on, outright bans where necessary. Again, there's a large public support for this. The question is how we get it implemented. Finally, our fifth key principle of action is integrated, predictable, and consistent policy approaches. So we need a clear long-term policy plan of where we're headed towards, where we're moving, to create stable conditions for society, for businesses, for citizens, moving towards this sustainable lifestyles. And we need to ensure that different regulations across these different consumption fields that we mentioned as well across nutrition, mobility, housing, leisure, that different regulations, economic incentives, and bans actually work together. Another one of our results and recommendations is about how we integrate ecological reform into social systems. So we need to ensure that sustainability and social well-being go hand in hand, that they're not played off against each other. We know that a just transition requires aligning environmental policies with social equity as well. So we need a policy mix that enhances both ecological and social well-being. And again, we need this also just to have democratic approval for much more stringent environmental policies. So our sort of overarching strategies for 1.5-degree lifestyles and resilient societies are having eco-social justice really as a cornerstone of goal-setting, communication, and policy implementation. So justice when it comes to inequalities around accessibility. And this again includes the cost and availability of services and products that align with 1.5-degree lifestyles. Also justice when it comes to health, economic and social harm of current unsustainable economic systems. So the harm of non-action and the co-benefits of action. And in general, again, eco-social justice as a strategy for change and for democratic approval. For this, we need broad coalitions for change. We need to create forums and find common ground around key topics that are important to people from very different social groups. So we need to find kind of common ground around specific local issues that impact people in their everyday lives. And we need to get better at finding and using different new communication channels. And find ways of meeting people across different target groups with different content channels and so on. So this would help us really to work together better with different members of society, and also it helps when we want citizens to take and assume responsibility for the future. And this, I think, is the final slide that I have. So who bears the responsibility for achieving 1.5-degree lifestyles? Well, in our project, we suggest that this responsibility is shared in a differentiated way based on skills, abilities, resources, and power. But again, eco-social justice must guide decision-making, communication, and action. So real change demands that we take collective responsibility, but not just individual action. We need to empower people to act as citizens and not just passive consumers. And we need better public accountability systems for organizing this shared responsibility in practice. And we come back to these deep structural shifts, moving away from endless growth toward people-centered economies, and building these broad coalitions and new alliances to counter sort of vested interest and democratize democracy and democratize our economy also. Okay, and I think I will end here so that we can also move on with our brilliant panel discussion. I've highlighted the website of the project here, as well as our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channels. So feel free to check these out. And I think with that, I will hand back to Michael, and I would invite the panelists also to join us again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Halliki and Lena, for presenting our 4-year project in just less than half an hour. We have invited 4 panelists to discuss these project insights with us and with everyone here. I'm happy to welcome Katharina Wiese from the European Environmental Bureau, Elisabeth Dütschke from Fraunhofer Institute for System and Innovation Research, Richard Bärnthaler from the Sustainability Research Institute at Leeds University, and Ernest Aigner from the Social-ecological Systems Institute at the University of Lüneburg. I would like to start with Kati. You are working in the kind of NGO sector, and it would be nice to hear from you what are the most useful and interesting research results from the project for you, and how can NGOs use these results?
Thanks, Michael. So first of all, also thanks a lot for having me, and yeah, congrats to the project and the results. And one thing I also want to say that the results align quite well with our work. I work for the European Environmental Bureau for the Economic Transition Team, and we've been actually highlighting for many years now that technological change alone will not solve the climate crisis. I mean, it's a bit of shameless self-promotion, but we did decoupling debunked report a few years ago. I can also post it in the chat that showed that there's no evidence to date that decoupling environmental pressures from economic growth will take place in the speed and scale required to reach 1.5 degrees. And it's also, aligns quite well what you have been saying. And if we look at the European Green Deal, I mean, the European Green Deal as such was also still or is still a growth strategy, as it relies on similar concepts. And based on the belief that as an economy society, we can reduce the overall material throughput and pollution without an actual reduction from the current overconsumption and consumption levels. So basically, it implies we can continue more or less, but with no significant lifestyle changes. Needless to say that the European Deal is still important, as some of the initiatives are actually now under attack. But yeah, I think it's or what I find useful is that it's clear, or the confirmation from your results, that what we need is actually deep and transformative changes to the economic system. So basically away from profit maximization and exploitation of people and planet towards prosperity within planetary boundaries. I also found very interesting the kind of like reframing of lifestyles, because when I hear the word lifestyle, I think first and foremost about individual changes or changes needed on the individual level. Because in the end, you can only choose what's on the menu. And I think, as you also highlight in your research, we're often trapped in lock-in systems or path dependencies. But I found it very interesting to reframe this and also show how we can only achieve lifestyle changes if we address the structural level. What I also found very interesting is the confirmation that people are actually willing to switch to more sustainable lifestyles if the conditions are favorable. And because you asked how we can use this, I think this can strengthen our arguments when we work with the Commission or other stakeholders, or when we propose policies, for example, the mobility sector. And one can say, I don't know, around 80% of the population would use public transport instead of the car if the public transport infrastructure were actually improved. And I was also reading on our website before this event. I also found interesting that some of the citizen labs showed that taxes or bans were also by far, I think, the most popular steps. And I think this is all, very interesting for us, as this is always used as an argument that people are not willing, or they're afraid to ban or implement bans on driving in inner cities, for example, or on aviation. What I also find interesting, or what confirms also with the work we do already, is that we need to support policies such as universal basic services, or in general provision of essential services in, for example, energy, mobility, and food, as well as ban or regulating advertisement in media. I mean, also both proposals that you make. As environmental NGO, it's not like working on a universal basic service is not natural to us, but we've been starting work more or advocate or promote UBS as one essential tool to achieve both social and climate justice. And I mean, having heard your results, this also motivates me to continue working on this, and also trying to get other NGOs, or especially environmental NGOs, on the board. Because I think I believe that UBS is one of the only solutions or core solutions to ensure that everyone's needs are met. And this, of course, also can only be achieved if we have massive public investment. And yeah, I also take this also from me in our advocacy work that we do around fiscal policies, for example, or the fiscal rules. And what I think one last important aspect is also that you highlight is that if we think about households, this is not a heterogeneous group, as as lifestyles or like different household groups have a higher carbon footprint. I think the numbers were that the top 1% of earners in Europe have a carbon footprint up to 30% or 30 times higher than the sustainable level needed that we need to achieve 1.5 degrees, and that the top 10% are responsible for about 50% of the total emissions in Europe. And I think, this is massive and also reiterates the message that we need distributional policies as well, such as the wealth tax, where we as also environmental NGOs trying to support or should also support those efforts that others are already doing. Maybe I leave it at here for now, and I'm also happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Kati. Sounds that our results could be pretty useful for you. And I would go on to Elisabeth Dütschke from Fraunhofer. You worked on our sister project, Fulfill. And well, where do you see interesting parallels to your work, to your own work? And what are you going to work on to further develop our understanding of these topics?
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me tonight, because we've been in contact over the full project lifetimes of our two projects, and it was always an inspiration to discuss with the colleagues from the 1.5 degree lifestyles, because we were doing quite similar things. And I think the interesting part is that we kind of had the methodology exactly opposite way around. So we started with looking into the micro level and ended with the modeling. And I think in your case it was just the other approach. Fulfill, well, it was a 3-year project, so it's completed already. It ended last year in September. We were 7 partners focusing on 5 European countries: Denmark, Germany, France, Italy, and Latvia. And in addition, we also did analysis and empirical work on India as a comparison outside Europe. And our main focus was on sufficiency lifestyles, and we defined sufficiency lifestyles as lifestyles which are low on carbon emissions and at the same time high or above average on well-being. And I think that was also maybe something where we took a bit of a different approach, that we kind of bound these two together, the well-being side and the low emissions. We looked into households initiatives, engaged with citizens and stakeholders, and then did extensive impact analysis using qualitative, quantitative approaches, and also input-output modeling. And what we found, and I think many of these findings are quite similar to what the 1.5 degree lifestyles project pointed out, is first of all, we found that there are already people in today's European societies who lead a sufficiency lifestyles, and but so they are low on emissions and feeling very well, being of good health, being satisfied with their life at the same time. Nevertheless, we also discovered I'd say a parallel group, which is very low on emissions, but feeling deprived socially, materially from society. And I think this points out a very important challenge on how to, to solve this dilemma, that of course being poor is also often very sustainable with regard to the environment, but definitely on economic or social terms. What we also found, very similar to what you did, is this very important role of structures. So this group that I just mentioned, who's living sufficiently today, they needed resources to do this. And resources could be like they had some financial resources, for example, to buy into living in an eco-village or something like that, or to move on to tiny housing, or, for example, they had a relatively high income and so were able to work part-time because sufficiency lifestyles also require time. They require additional competences to organize, for example, a vegan lifestyle, or to build your tiny house yourself, etc. So we saw this close connection with the resources, and then of course also like shared resources in society. We kind of confirmed the same areas you were looking into, so very important role for nutrition, also in the impact assessment, as is something I think that's been a bit less on the table in this energy decarbonizing community so far. I think we talked a lot more about energy, electricity, heating, maybe cooling, etc. And I think, of course, it's not completely new that the plant-based diet is more environmentally friendly, but I think it's been less on the table. And then we also saw, and here I'm referring to something Lena mentioned when she said that, for example, co-housing alternatives were not very much supported by the citizens you engaged with. It was the same in our case, but we could find in the statistical analysis a relationship that it kind of in how far people are familiar with these alternatives, and then also that, and we were maybe like, I don't know, doing research on this, still a bit surprised that how many of these ideas are relatively unknown, and then let's say maybe people are a bit reluctant to buy in immediately. But then we could also show that like communication already changing slightly the communication on these alternatives makes the difference in how they are perceived. What we are doing now, as I said, the project is over, and what we took from it is, of course, the role of structures, the communication, but then also very importantly that this well-being and social justice dimension is very important. And what we are currently kind of increasingly focusing on is to also look to combine this with research on societal debates, so with societal cohesion and fragmentation, which I assume is very much up to date if we look into the news.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elisabeth. Richard from Leeds, what do you think? How does our 1.5-degree lifestyle project contribute to rethinking lifestyles in the context of social ecological transformation? And what key considerations or gaps should be addressed moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much also for inviting me. I've also followed this project over the, I think, last 3 or 4 years. And I think it's really important and a really great project for many reasons, but especially what I like, challenges this conventional idea of lifestyles as individual behavioral adjustments, or even worse, as individual choices, and emphasizes that lifestyles are shaped by social, economic, and political structures. With this kind of understanding, the project shifts the focus to structural barriers, as Halliki invested in growth imperatives and power dynamics, which are often overlooked in kind of mainstream lifestyle debates. In that sense, I think that the project's concept of lifestyle itself aligns quite closely with what the German philosopher Rahel Jaegi, which she actually explicitly distinguishes from transient fashion-driven lifestyles, where forms of life are the institutions and supra-individual connections relation to basically our collective social and political structures that give our life a certain form, so that shape how we live in a certain way. And as such, these things cannot be individual choices, but possess public and political relevance. And I think this is important to recontextualize this idea of lifestyles. And this focus on structural conditions also leads me to one area that might be worth, and that is that, so while 1.5 degree lifestyle, the concept of 1.5 degree lifestyles, as well as related concepts like consumption corridors, for example, very effectively situate consumption within systemic and structural contexts, they at least tend to place relatively little emphasis on the role of production systems as a key structural condition that actually underpins lifestyles and drives consumption. For example, the presentation highlighted necessary shifts in lifestyles, such as adopting plant-based diets, transitioning to renewable energy systems, and ensuring sufficient, so enough, but not too much, living space, and depend on specific structural conditions. But here a key question would also be, I think, who produces and harvests the food for plant-based diets and under what kind of conditions? So how is this lifestyle shift made possible by specific labor and production systems? Or who owns and controls housing and energy systems? And how is this transition to kind of greener living lifestyles contingent on transformations in ownership structures? So my point here is that although 1.5 degree lifestyles and related concepts like consumption corridors very effectively situate consumption within particular systemic and structural contexts, what Marx called the hidden abode of production, so where overconsumption and related lifestyles are actually produced, sometimes tend to remain a bit underexplored. I'm deliberately not saying ignored because it is in the focus, but I think there's too little emphasis on that sometimes. And why does this matter? I think beyond the fundamental role in social ecological transformation of questions like who controls provisioning, who owns the means of production, who owns the means of reproduction, and who produces what, under what conditions, and for whom, this focus on production also matters for coalition building and for shaping different narratives of change. And I think the way we frame real-world struggle for social ecological changes is really crucial here. Compare, for example, the narrative that the climate crisis necessitates a shift to plant-based lifestyles with one that highlights harvesters and food workers as being at the forefront of ecological struggles, given that they're among the most affected by environmental impacts. And this kind of reframing then underscores, for example, that safer, better workplaces, changed forms of control and of ownership, and ecologically sustainability are fundamentally interconnected and cannot be disentangled. And this also connects to what Halliki emphasized, this idea of eco-social justice that was highlighted in the presentation as a key role of health, economic, and social co-benefits. And I think this is a really important step to acknowledge this. But I also think that the very concept of co-benefits still suggests that we are operating still within the same paradigm, where health, better working conditions, reduced inequalities, secure living conditions are always treated as side effects, as co-benefits to the actual climate policy, rather than as our fundamental priorities of a social ecological transformation. And finally, why does this matter today, or particularly today and in the current conjuncture? And I do exaggerate a bit now to make my point, but I think politically climate is currently in a way of the agenda. But perhaps we need to change our behavior to mitigate the climate crisis framing has always been a very fragile, liberal, middle-class construct, especially when tied to technocratic, net zero language that for a very good reason lacks any broad appeal. And what people experience daily is not an abstract climate crisis, but a health crisis, a crisis of living conditions, a crisis of working conditions, a crisis of general exhaustion. And these are all social ecological crises and potential entry points for transformation precisely because they are grounded in everyday experience. And when we now look at the headlines today, what we see is security, basically. Security dominates all kinds of headlines: social security, economic security, international security, energy security. And this is the terrain where I think political battles are currently being fought. And it is precisely where sufficiency becomes so crucial. Sufficiency not framed as a climate policy, but as a strategy for economic sovereignty and for security. And Kati and the Environmental Bureau, they published a really nice report some time ago called A Resilient and Resource-Wise Europe. It's really worth looking into that. That also kind of develops this narrative in a way. And sufficiency here functions as a double strategy that matches with the current political discourse on security. Because on the one hand, it reduces risky global dependencies and fosters strategic autonomy by absolutely reducing excessive energy service demand. And on the other hand, it ensures essential services such as energy, food, housing remain accessible and affordable. And I do stop here because I think that really ties back again to the presentation and the focus on acceptance conditions that Halliki emphasized several times: availability, affordability, health, social relations, which I think can serve as some strategic entry points for transformation, even in strange times like these.
Thank you very much, Richard. Next, I would like to ask Ernest. You work in the MASIS project, or MASIS, or however to pronounce it. What are the key research results from our project for you? And where do you see parallels to your own work? And what are you working further to further develop our understanding of these topics?
Thank you very much for having me at this podium. I really enjoyed a lot, and I followed the project as the other panelists as well. And it has been a very inspiring project for me in the last years, especially also because at some period, which is already a few years ago, it has been in some kind of tandem with a former project of mine, which was a special report on structures for climate-friendly living. And I would like to start with that short, because there we concluded, and it's an assessment report of 80 authors, and we started the summary for policymakers with the very simple sentence that currently it is difficult to live climate friendly in Austria. And I think the triviality of this sentence very much summarizes a large part of the things we heard before. Focusing on the individual is not which would make the necessary changes. And indeed, it's probably simply impossible. And as a consequence, we shifted the focus on the many structures which are there to be changed, and they are like all over. They include the production system, the financial market system, the work systems, the welfare systems, the media system, and so on. And just looking on Austria, this is a tremendous challenge, but definitely a need to focus on. And I do think the beauty of the 1.5 degree project is really to integrate both of them also empirically. So on the one hand, you have studies with individuals in citizens forums and so on. And at the same time, you also try to link that back to the necessary structural change. And this is, scientifically speaking, I think a very challenging thing. And I think one can only congratulate the project that they really succeeded in that. Then a second part of my past work I would like to emphasize then now here is because I sometimes have the impression that people speak like freely about the social crisis which is ongoing in the world, and you say, okay, there is a lot of harm and poverty, but when you really look into the studies of how poor people are in high income countries, the degree of inequality is really astonishing. People in Austria living who cannot afford actually food, who do not eat the whole day because they don't have the necessary money to do that. People wouldn't expect it, but that's what's going on. And I think that's why I think one of the most important aspects of the 1.5 degree project, which has also been already emphasized by speakers before me, is the focus on eco-social policies and their real potential to improve the daily living conditions of many people, and thereby at the same time enable sufficient 1.5 degree lifestyles, even without speaking about them necessarily. As Richard pointed out, discursive frames, media, and so on, they change over time. Policy and politics has to adapt to them, and strategies have to be to some extent flexible in this terrain. And as a consequence, I think focusing on the many structures and looking where at the moment interventions are possible is needed. And this is, again, one of the strengths of the 1.5 degree project, because it has this wide umbrella of intervention points, of structures to change, which probably will pop up in certain conjunctures and will be more important, and then in other conjunctures, others will be more important. Finally, and that's now more from the scientific side of my speaking, for the MACES project, which is mainstreaming social ecological sufficiency. It's also a European Union project we are 5 people conducting research on sufficiency, and my personal task is to do research on what we call social sufficiency, and we more or less operationalize it at what is perceived to be enough. So what we're interested in is actually not necessarily what people are doing, but much more what people perceive to be enough. And I do think this is important. So it's an important addition to the speakers before me, because the focus has been very much on actual modes of living or what people actually do in their daily lives. But as we have figured out, it's not necessarily easy to live as you want, because it's difficult to live climate friendly. So it is quite interesting to figure out to what extent actually people perceive to live in enoughness conditions. So do they have too much? Do they have too little? Would they prefer to live in a different mode? And again, this is where we build on the Fulfill project and also on the 1.5 degree project. We kind of expect that even the enoughness notion, so what people perceive to be enough, is highly structurally dependent, and not only is not an individual, even though individuals maybe hold it, but it's not an individual condition. This implies that we would see that people who are living in high income areas probably have higher enoughness conditions. People with car dependency have higher enoughness conditions. And on these levels, we've built on the research and look forward actually also to engage with those who conducted research in the former projects, to learn from them and foster our project, which is still in the early phase. It's just in developing the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernest, very much for these nice words. Also to our project. Well, we have now had one round in this panel and with very interesting contributions. And we have 7:30 now. So I think I would like to open the discussion to all of us via the Q&A channel. And so you are welcome to, start with questions. I think we have had a couple of questions already. And it was about insulation and about the intention action gap. And we got, I think, some of this quite well answered already, but I would be happy to hear more of your questions. But Halliki would like...
While we wait for people, and I want to empower everyone to raise their hand. I think I even have the ability to give someone the floor. So if you're amongst our participants and you would like to ask a question and you have a camera and a microphone, then we can even give you the floor. I would like to respond really quickly to what Rihad and Ernest said, if that's okay. Just a couple of points, because of course, I think that could be that can be the next project, is this production corridor, this paper that we're been talking about for some time. Work in general comes up quite a lot in our project, even though we focus on consumption. So we did see also in working with citizens or playing the puzzle that very often consumption is justified with work. So I need a car because I need to get to work, or because we live here, or I need to do this because of work, and so on. And in our stakeholder thinking labs, participants actually brought up work themselves, because they said, well, why aren't you looking at work? But of course, you can't do everything in one project. And we do include work also when we look at 1.5 degree aligned welfare states. So we look at working time reduction specifically as a policy. So, but also very narrowly. I mean, we discussed that with policymakers to see how they see working time reduction as a policy. It's interesting that Rihad said that politically climate is currently off the agenda. I think we all see that and we feel that. And we very interestingly had our German policy workshop where Lena was also there just before the elections. And this is also exactly what we heard from the sort of hopeful the candidates that were in the audience. So we had quite a few different candidates from across the political spectrum, actually, except from AfD, but otherwise across the spectrum, and just talking about how difficult it is. But again, I think it comes back to this, health cost, ease and normality question of how we try to find sort of common kind of issues that we want to work on the ground. No one has put their hand up yet.
I think in that case, we might give another question to the panelists, but maybe even to the public.
I think Elisabeth had her hand up briefly. I saw it before she took it down. So
yeah, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but two things came to my mind, and they're both a bit related to that we are also maybe not, I don't know, giving out a very depressing message tonight. I think we all emphasized the role of structural change, and a bit of that individuals don't have much power or ability to make lifestyle changes. And my intention is not to say this is wrong, because I very much agree. But at the same time, I think it's still people have possibilities. And that's also what I think you all saw that in your research, because some people are able to do a different lifestyles, and then also already relatively small measures can bring some change. I think the prominent example is the Deutschland ticket, the German public transport ticket that has been issued. Sometimes I think a bit by accident that it came out, which there was no change to public transportation in Germany, which is, let's say, it's not extremely bad, but it's also not very good. But still, people have increased to use public transport already. So like already small support can make big changes, and then at least some people have the possibility to change. And then there's always, of course, the possibility to engage politically for the change of structures. And I think that's been a bit underrated in many discussions, that this is also a way of triggering behavioral change. Yeah, I think that was just something I think that we don't, just so that we don't get into a way of thinking that we are all poor passive citizens who, I don't know, need to wait for a savior.
Yeah, I used to say, well, while we are waiting, we still can start changing things. But yeah, still, we have a couple of hands up from Richard first, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly add to that, so that just to emphasize that I completely agree with that. And also related to Ernest's reference to the APCC report that came out last year. And I think one of the key messages there is that change is possible, and people have agency, but only as a collective. So I think the message there was, can't remember, I think it was coordinated and targeted action. Ernest, I think, knows the words by heart, but something like that. So the key message was really that you need collective action for change, to change structures. And collective action looks very different depending on what context you are in. That can be the household context where you decide on certain things, but it could be the political area, could be the neighborhood. So collective really changes depending on the scale, but also depending on what kind of structure you actually try to, in what kind of structure you also try to intervene.
Thank you. I think Kati was next.
Yes, thanks, Michael. Yeah, also to join a bit, to not give too a gloomy picture, I think I also wanted to just add, I mean, it is a very challenging context at the moment. I think there's a clear prioritization of defense and competitiveness, etc., and deprioritization of climate. But I still feel like there are also windows of opportunities that we can tap into and that we should also use. For example, when we think about distributional policies, there are lots of things happening on G20 and UN level to push for a wealth tax that we also try to support on the EU level. And at least the Commissioner Dombrovskis also said, or it's in the Commission work program, to at least conduct a study on different wealth tax approaches in in the EU, it's I mean, it's not given that we have an EU wealth tax, but I think it's an entry point. And I think another window of opportunity is also that Enrico Letta, who was, besides Draghi, was also commissioned to write a study how to revitalize competitiveness in the EU, said that for him, universal basic service, I think he called it service of general interest in mobility, housing, etc., is actually essential for achieving a EU single market and competitiveness. So I think that's also, something we could look into. And another point I also feel like is when policymakers now try to go back to the 80s, 90s toolbox of neoliberal policies that will probably don't bring economies back as they wish to. I think it's also good to have ambitious policy proposals in the drawer that we can then propose as similar what happened also during COVID. To also, I know it's a bit gloomy these days, but I think there are also some avenues.
I think I have Ernest still from the panelists, but then we have also a question from Eric in the Q&A. So maybe Ernest, if you are quick.
I think I'm gonna be a bit the negative side here again. I think that the key point about this power question or having power, I think, is to acknowledge that not everybody has power. And I think this is very important, actually, and I think this is very legitimate. I think one of the strengths of liberal democracies is to limit and distribute power according to a set of well thought through principles. And in these settings, then what type of action can actually make the necessary changes is not a trivial question. It's quite complicated, and it should definitely not demotivate. I think it's a highly important and activating task, actually, to form collectives, to get organized, to get in the respective positions. And it's key, and changes can be made, but I think one needs to reflect and be careful where to engage and what, and be aware it's not like a choice at the supermarket if you take one butter or the other one. It's really like a decision you make and actually try to move structures somewhere else. And I think that's the message we wanted to transport to the list. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to give Eric the chance to speak. It's very exciting. Eric, are you on the line? Okay,
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I think
Yes.
so. We can't see you, unfortunately.
Well, let me try.
But we can hear you.
I'm on the. Yeah, I don't see how I can turn on video here.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I'm actually not in the U.S. I'm at the University of Leeds with Rickard, but yes, I just wanted to say that well, I've been arguing that structural transformation is really the only way that you can achieve the transition that we need. Just as you've been saying, there was a plea to not be entirely depressing, and so I would say that the thing that I tell people when they ask me that is, it's also possible for individuals to act in such a way that they aren't making a transformation harder, by helping to lock in structural. No, I'm getting off next one. By locking in structural decisions. So that's all. Small comment, but trying to be a little less depressing.
Thanks for that.
Much appreciated.
Anyone else would like to?
Oh yeah, please raise your hand or write to me or ask in the Q&A if you would like to take the floor for a question or a comment. But if it's okay, I wanted to add one thing. There's a very interesting report that just came out by More in Common, who are a brilliant UK NGO doing work on narratives and kind of exactly this coalition building and all of these things that we've been discussing, right? And they have they have a report about progressive activists who are about 10% of the UK population, who are a very specific group of people. I think all of us here, I would say, who are more stressed, lonely, and sad than the rest of society, and are distant from everyone else, basically, on many cultural issues, and thus also kind of fail to speak to other people in a way. So I think they're the only group that thinks that woke culture, whatever that means, has a positive impact on society, and many other of these topics. And I think the issue is that these progressive activists kind of are cut away and find it hard to communicate things in a way that people can take these issues on. And in that sense, people then push away the whole idea. And I can post this report also in the chat, just as a way to make us think about how we communicate. Again, these lifestyle questions, maybe we can communicate them in a different way. Yeah, how do we get people to understand them from the position that they're coming from? It's a very interesting report, and I've done a lot of soul searching after reading it, so I will post it in the chat. There's one comment. So I will try to do this magic again and give Aisha is it Aisha the floor? Let's see if this works.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah. I don't know if well, I have my camera, but I don't know if it's working.
I think maybe I can see if I can make you a panelist. If you can join us.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Okay. We can see you as well. Great.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for this very interesting webinar. I am actually in the process of looking for a new opportunity to work on questions related to scenario building and lifestyles under the planetary boundaries. And so I have been interested really in bibliography around this subject, and especially on the global north, since most of the research comes from the global north. But I've been having some ideas, or as I said, like I have a comment / ideas / big question for all the panelists. I heard one of the suggestions that you had from the discussion with the stakeholders were that they were ready to try and change their lives to live sustainably, and they gave some ideas such as living in big houses or in communal houses, if the infrastructure and if the governance is made for that. And it actually coincides with some of the things that I have been thinking about. I am Moroccan, and since, well, I come from the global south, I had put on some ideas which actually we could like mutually we can get inspired from the fact that maybe the development that is going on, that is following a capitalistic system, maybe is not the best way to follow, given that the global north has already followed this path and now is trying to find a solution of how to sustainably live. But at the same time, when I think about Morocco, it has not been much time since we have been living in this, I would say, sustainably to a certain point. For example, we had communal, I can call it like communal living, or at least big houses that where like big families would live, and many of the chores, much of the food making and was how to say it, destined for many people, so there was less waste. For example, when I think about public services like public baths, which are which were like also made in the sense of housing a lot of people to be able to take baths, but that are in this time we could say that they were energy efficient, water efficient, versus like having a bath in each house, an individualistic house, which we do have now. At the same time, even when I think about the food cycle or the food waste that we had, like all the food that is left, I mean, we have this belief that the food does not, we should not mix it with the other waste, and the waste of food is actually put on roofs to dry, and then it is being sold to farmers and breeders. So that way, actually, we already have this kind of economic or circular economy that is related to food. But unfortunately, I can see that now it's going more. I mean, we are getting further and further from this. So my comment or my idea was that I think there is a potential like lesson that we can learn from this, maybe for the global south, to remind them that we already had this type of living, this type of sustainable living that we can get back to, while also trying to find our place in the world, in a developed world, or in a world where people can feel that they are living well. But at the same time, we can, for the global north, maybe they can also like learn from this kind of communal lifestyles that maybe would be more interesting to explore, to try to find this, a kind of an equilibrium between the north and the south. So that's my idea. I don't know if anybody has something to say, but thank you anyway.
Thanks so much
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
opening also this direction of the discussion.
Thanks.
I think Halliki would be happy to reply, but if some of the panelists would like to reply directly, so you are welcome too.
Maybe I can start us off, and then now I already took the floor. I just wanted to say that's a really good comment, and I think it's exactly it. I think the global north has so much to learn from the global south. And I'm Estonian, and of course, Estonia went through a huge transformation trying to become this capitalist country of high consumption, with lots of things that were lost on the way. And I think we really need to learn from these old Estonian grannies that are living on tiny pensions and sustainably. I think there's a lot to learn. And also in terms of just community and all of these important things that we've lost. So I think there's much more that we can learn from the global south. So yeah, it's a very great comment. And I'll pass to Richard with that.
No, yeah, just to add to that I think it's a really important comment, and that there's lots of things to learn. I mean, the classic example is the city of short distances, which is a super new smart concept. But look into Vienna, the socialist Vienna in the 1920s, this is where we had a city of short distances, where you had your socialist housing blocks, where you had libraries, where you had swimming pools, where you had a childcare, where you had your washing areas, everything close to your housing, and that has been massively changed in the 70s. But there is a lot of I think past practices that we also need to look back to, that have been communal, but that have also been state-led. Many socialist practices that have been clearly state-led, and not just happening on a communal level as well. Yeah.
If I may add to that, because I mentioned that we also studied India in the Fulfill project, and so maybe I could just point out one or two findings. And I think the picture there was in a way complex. Of course, for example, we found a closer link between carbon emissions and well-being, meaning that where we could now see the full range of let's say lifestyle levels. I'm not sure that probably you need a certain consumption to fulfill needs in a way that was more obvious than in the European societies, where I think more or less most people were above a certain minimum standard. On the other hand, what we also found is that people from India were more supportive of more radical policies. And I think this has a lot to do with maybe being more aware of consequences in your everyday life, and also being more familiar and aware of this heterogeneity and this contrast between richer and poorer people and different ways of living. And then, of course, we had much more broader findings. I would go too far now, but which can really support this, but I suppose put forward here that we need this kind of mutual learning across countries.
I just had an idea because of what you said about the development is coupled to a level of carbon footprint. But I just recently, I don't remember if it was a podcast or an article that talked about the climate appropriation. So we know that the global north has reached this point because it has taken much of the resources of the earth, and that they are also the first, let's say, responsible for the climate warming at least. And there's this concept of climate repay, or like maybe financial, like repay of the fact that the global north has already like taken advantage of the resources, which probably can be an opportunity for the global south to lean into this financial, I don't know if to call it really repay or incentive, and draw a better path, let's say, to development. For example, now with the development also of the technology of the all the renewable energy that can be leveraged in the place of coal or oil or fuel, fossil fuels. So I think there is this opportunity that maybe the global south can but as you said, it's in the same sense of mutual partnership and action.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything else anyone would like to say right now or ask?
Maybe one comment, if no one, which is, of course, this kind of chicken and the egg problem, because you always assume, of course, that people need to agree to certain changes, and if they don't agree, you cannot have those changes. But then, of course, we also know empirically that many people agree with changes only after they have been implemented. So you also need a certain form of regulation and political parties, I assume, that change the context. And of course, it's difficult because they need to be democratically legitimated, but also in a representative democracy, they are representing, and the task is also to do what's necessary in a certain context. And we see that, I mean, in many contexts. Think about smoking in airplanes or in trains. It's unthinkable to do that now. But if you would have asked people if they want to stop that, I think they didn't. I mean, at least in Austria, smoking to stop smoking in bars, people thought the world goes down, and now no one would do that anymore. So often I think, chicken and egg problem in terms of regulation and acceptance.
That's another very good point. Yeah. So I think we are approaching the end of our discussion, as we have only a couple of minutes left. And well, hard to make a summary, but nice to hear that it looks like our project has produced something that's useful for many of you, as I interpret it, and that was, of course, nice to notice. I don't know how familiar people here are with all the things we have produced in the project. For instance, we have produced a citizen guide that's already available online, where we also open quite widely the discussion about sustainable lifestyles. We have a website that tells everything also about scientific paper and whatever you would like to find there. It's 1.5lifestyles.eu, so easy to find. And yeah, I think we have 8 o'clock now, Middle European time. So I would like to thank everyone. And we have one more hand risen. Did I see it right?
It's gone.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you all and have a nice evening.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.